Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Ye Olde Foundry. Now, this is going to be a short video. Basically, all I'm going to cover in this video is a type of old-fashioned mold wash that you can use in your molds, in your mold cavities, and in your molding. Okay. Now, what's a mold wash? Well, basically, all it is that after you've made your mold, you know, you've pulled you rammed up your pattern, you pulled the pattern, and you're ready to put everything together and pour the molten metal. What you're going to be doing is, you can either spray it or brush it. It doesn't make any difference. You're going to be putting a covering on the inside. Like if, for instance, if you use a very coarse sand for your molding, you know, you almost, anytime you pour anything, even if it's aluminum, you'll find out that the surface of your casting is not very smooth, okay? If you are pouring iron or steel or Monel, let's say, anything that's very hot, okay? Even if it's a very smooth surface for your mold cavity, the heat from those hottest type of metals is going to, when it flashes over the surface of it, it's going to turn the, let's say you're using bentonite, it'll turn the bentonite clay into ash. It'll float the ash away from the surface of the mold cavity, and what you'll have, if you were to look at it very, very closely, it looks like a bunch of individual boulders in there with gaps in between, okay? Well, like with that iron, cast iron, that's that flows like a water, okay? And that's the reason why you see so many things made out of cast iron that are filigreed and have a lot of little tiny flowers and little tiny vines and all that stuff. If you look at some of the old castings from the 1800s, early 1900s, because the cast iron, you know, would flow very easily to all the parts of the mold cavity. It would go everywhere. Okay. Well, the same goes if you've developed a gap in between the sand grains because either you're using a very large sand grain, a very coarse sand grain, or the stuff that you had in between the grains was burned up by the heat of the iron or steel. This material will fill in those gaps, so the surface of your iron castings will be very rugged. Okay. In addition, if you're using silica sand as a molding constituent in your molding sand instead of a higher temperature sand, then that would, you know, survive the high heat of iron and steel. You would also from the heat, you would make the sand grains themselves start to gel together, and you know, in some cases, depending on the mass of your casting, would to totally melt it. And then what you'll find when you pull your casting out is that you won't have the bare metal showing. You'll have to chip away what looks like some kind of a slack, almost a paint from the silica sand being glued to your casting. Okay, so how do you solve that? Well, you put a coating between your molding sand and your regular sand, rather your molding sand and the metal. All right, this mold wash, and you know, you can visualize if you wash something, it would almost be called a mold paint, but it's a mold wash because you can put the mold wash on almost anything. The inside of your molds, you can coat your cores with this mold wash, which would be a core wash at that time, and it'll all do the same thing. It'll make The cores will be covered with a nice smooth surface. You put it in there, and the molten metal won't penetrate the cores anywhere. It'll just form around a nice smooth surface. The same being said for the inside of your molds. The molten metal will flow over the mold wash and solidify on that nice smooth surface. Okay, if you don't have a mold wash, especially in iron, cast iron, you're going to always have to work harder to get those gaps, or rather the pebbliness or the jaggedness of that casting surface. You're going to have to try and grind that down and make it look better. Pardon me. If you put the mold wash on it, it'll form right over it, and you won't have near as much work. Okay, once in a while you'll have to fix something. Okay, that's the nature of the business. But this puts a barrier between your molding sand and your molten metal, and the surface will be, most of the time I saw, the surface was very smooth. Okay, all we had to do then was to grind off the parting line to make it smoother yet, where that flashing came through. They call it flashing, like when the two pieces, I don't have anything to show. You have the two pieces that have come together, and you have what looks like a little tiny fin of solid metal, and that's not part of the casting, so you've got to grind that off. You grind that off nice and smooth where it was, and your casting will look great. Okay, but back to the subject. Mold wash. Okay, I've read a lot of material that was written in the 1800s that came basically from the Industrial Revolution over in England, and there was numerous mold washes that they could make. Now, don't forget, these guys had to use their natural stuff that was around them. Okay. Number one, they didn't have a bunch of money. They weren't big, most of them weren't big foundries. They were basically like in here. I don't think most foundries back in the earliest days was much bigger than this room. Okay, they had a batch of sand, and most of the sand was just basically on the ground. And they would water it with a watering can, mix it all up, make sure it worked, the bentonite or dextrin. Sometimes they use dextrin to be sticky enough to make molds, and then they would make the molds and pour the metal and all that. They weren't much bigger than this. But the key behind this is they had to use what was available, what worked well. They tried all kinds of experiments, and they finally settled on things that worked well for their foundry and was available. Didn't have a lot of money to spend to buy it from some place over in Germany or France or Italy or any other of those places. They had to work with what they had. Okay, so it was inexpensive and useful. Now, this formula that I'm going to show you was a formula that I read out of the Molder 3 and 2 handbook. Okay, now Molder being the person who makes molds, 3 and 2 is Molder 3rd class, Molder 2nd class. Okay, now these were basically study books. Had a lot of information in them. You used them as reference books later on, and even now, at me almost 70 years old, I use it as a reference book to give you a formula to make a mold wash that anybody can find the materials for, especially nowadays when you can find almost anything on the internet. Okay, the things that I got, I got them ordered and I had them show up here at the house. They were all on the internet. Okay, whether it be for instance, one of the materials was from one of those stores that you can make your own, figurines by pouring plaster of Paris inside of molds, or a slurry a special slurry inside those molds, pour out the excess, let them dry up. You put them into an oven and you fire them up and make them nice and hard. And then or before that, you let them dry out. You paint them with a good glaze and you fire them up, and you get something beautiful. Okay. Well, they use silica sand, or rather silica powder, as part of their slurries, right? I ordered my silica powder, which is one of the constituents of this formula, from one of those places where they sell all kinds of stuff to make those figurines and stuff. You could even, from this place I bought, you could even buy those big ovens, those, that fires up these things. But I'm not into that. I'm not interested in that. But I did need silica powder, okay? Silica flour, that is. And I was able to order it from them. Now, from the internet also, from, shoot, what is it? Anyway, it's one of the places where you can buy almost anything. eBay, okay? eBay, I got on there and found somebody who was selling dextrin. Now, dextrin is a plant-based binder, okay? It's been compared to, it's like a sugar, all right? You grind it up, and it's not pure sugar, but it's got a sugar base to it, where it makes everything sticky, all right? So it would behave as a good binder in your molding sand, all right? But in this case, we're going to be using it as part of the mold wash. Bentonite is part of the mold wash. You already know about that if you've watched any of the videos. Bentonite is a clay, which is it's not an organic binder. It's inorganic. It's a clay that you mix with your silica sand to make green sand, and you can make molds with it, right? But this is going to be used in this formula, this mold wash formula. And then, of course, water. Okay, you're not just trying to make a paste. You're trying to make something that can be either painted on the inside of the mold, or can be sprayed in a sprayer inside the mold. Okay, so that's the explanation of what a mold wash is for. Now, my study books when I first got in was like this size and this shape, rather this thickness, and it was the first one I studied was the Molder 3 and 2, so I could get qualified to become a third class molder or a second class molder, or it was the next one would be the same basic shape and size and color for first and chief. So I'd make a first class petty officer and chief petty officer, right? Study materials, good reference materials. Just like the Foundry Manual is an excellent reference material. If you can ever get your hand on this, you've got so much stuff in here, it'll teach you a lot. I used to sit whenever I had any time in between jobs, especially when we were underway, and we couldn't pour anything underway. I would study this thing. But the books were colored like that, and they had these chevrons on the front of them to indicate what what range this was. This was a third class petty officer's chevron and badge, or rank patch, and this was a second class petty officer's patch. You see that Molder 3 and 2 right there. It tells who should be studying this. And now, and all of the Navy training courses had, they were all designated by a certain number, so you could put in a supply request to get one of these books. So if you was going to order any of these books, you would send for the NAVPERS 1058-4-Alpha if you were going to get this one. Well, when I came in, this one was replaced many times over, because when I finished Molder A School, which taught us the vast majority of the information we needed to do our job, the books, well, this one was out and printed in 1958. Okay, my books were printed in the 70s. Okay, and every time they made a new printing, they always got rid of old stuff and they put in new information that was applicable to our situation there at that day and time and in those situations. You know, what kind of things we were going to make and so forth. Okay, so this was 1958, right? Now, I'm going to turn you around to the whiteboard so that you can see exactly what it's written there. Okay, and this will be the time for you to pause this video so you can write all this stuff down. All right, so one moment, I will turn you over, move you a little bit, and turn you there. Okay, so here's the formula. You got silica flour you got to get, bentonite. Now you got two different types of bentonite. One is southern bentonite, one is western bentonite. And it didn't say which one's the best for this formula. So you can get, you can use, if you already have bentonite for making your green sand, use whichever bentonite you have, okay? Dextrin, which is another binder, but this is a organic binder, okay? This is inorganic, basically made of clay, which is a degradation of some type of stone, whether it be, you know, granite or whatever. When the granite breaks down, a lot of it turns into a clay. Those of you who are geologists would know better than I would. I'm just hoofing it right now on that. I remember reading about it, but I don't remember what kind of stone it was that turned into clay. Dextrin, organic, meaning it comes from plants, okay? You have your water, and you don't have to add this material, sodium benzoate, unless you're going to make a big batch. For instance, like you're going to fill up a 55-gallon drum. You add sodium benzoate, a very small amount basically, but what you're going to do is that's going to keep anything, it's going to keep the mixture from souring. Okay, it'll prevent spoilage from harmful bacteria, yeasts, and mold. The only part of this whole formula that would allow that would be the dextrin, which is made from the plant material. Okay, that's broken down stone. That's still stone, but just ground up. The water, unless you use a really poor water, something from a river or something like that, you ain't gonna have the bacteria in it at that time. Okay, so you got all this and sodium benzoate if you make a big batch. If you make a bunch, there's people who's had over hundreds of gallons in a big tank to because they were using a lot of mold wash. For instance, on those great big castings that made out of steel or made out of iron, and they would use a lot on spray. Okay, now these percentages are by weight. All right, if this was 100 pounds, if you were making 100 pounds of mold wash, you would use 64 pounds of silica flour. You'd use 1.5 pounds of benzoate, 30 pounds of dextrin, and 31 1/3 pounds of water. I'm not going to make that much. I don't have that much material. I'm just going to make a sample amount. So I basically just figured 5 pounds. 5 pounds of mold wash should be plenty good for whatever little demonstration I make. Okay, so using my basics math skills, I took these percentages, took 5 pounds and broke it all down. Silica flour is 3.2 pounds. Bentonite is 0.08 pounds. Dextrin will be 0.15 pounds. and water is 1.56 pounds. Now I don't have the kind of weighing, the scales that'll give me, pardon me, pounds in decimals. So what I had to do is, because I do have a scale that'll weigh in ounces, I broke that down into its equivalent in ounces. Silica flour will be 51.2 ounces. Bentonite will be 1.2 ounces. Dextrin will be 2.4 ounces. And water will be 25.04 ounces. Okay? Now keep in mind, these are weights. The water is not a fluid ounces. Okay? It's actually how much the water weighs. Right? So, and that's how, that's what I'm going to make right here. So, let me take and put this out of the way. Set this out of the way. Tell you what, this whiteboard comes in handy, especially for when you're trying to illustrate something. All right, let's get this out of the way too, so we don't get nothing wet on it. Now what I'm going to do, now the book, what it says is to mix the dry parts first and then put the water in afterwards. Now that would work if you needed to have a core paste, for instance, at the very beginning. You know, if you've already taken like a two-part core, let's say just your basic cylinder shape, you made half the cylinder and then the other half of the cylinder, you dried them out, you baked them, and then now they're ready to assemble and put into the mold, right? So a glue needs to hold these together. All we ever used, we didn't use a special core paste. We used just white glue, okay? We just put a little thin dribble of white glue in between the two parts, let them sit, and that held them. Now remember, they're not going to have to go through a whole lot of damage or jostling or anything like that. Basically all you're going to do once you get done with your core, once you've prepped it for whatever you want, whichever way you want to prep it, you just set it in the mold and then close the mold. Pour the stuff, pour the metal in there, it flows into the mold cavity, flows around the core, and makes that void that you're trying to make inside the casting. Well, once you glued those two halves together, you're going to have a gap in there where the two halves came together. If you want to, you can make a paste that fills in that gap, so you don't have to reach way inside the casting and grind down all the fins that are formed inside the casting. You fill in that gap in there, make it just as smooth as the outside of the core, and you won't have to do all that work inside. And especially if you're making a casting that's a pressure casting, like a valve body or a pump body, any of that. You don't want to mess with the inside of those castings, because when you cast them, the metal, when it solidifies around that core, that's the hardest, smallest grains that form, right? That acts as a very good pressure point, where it'll keep the liquid or whatever's being pumped through that valve body or in that pump body. That'll keep that from penetrating in between the grains of metal. Okay, so if you don't mess with that, you've got a pretty good pressure container for the inside of that casting. So you take your core, when you mix some water in with that formula for the mold wash, and when it's a kind of a paste, you take a little bit and you spread it inside the crack, turn it over, spread it in the outside the other crack, let that dry, then spray the core with the mold wash. Okay. Keep in mind, there's all kinds of different formulas that you can use for different cores. that are associated with different types of casting that you're making, whether it be made of steel, brass, bronze, aluminum. Everybody's got their own little formula. Now, this stuff that I just showed you is extremely inexpensive in today's world. The foundry companies that make mold washes, they make excellent mold washes, but they cost. Okay, one of the folks that told me a note, or rather sent me a note online, said that they use a purple type of mold wash. I expect that stuff is probably pretty expensive. I suggest that if you find that the constituent parts for this mold wash is considerably less than what your company is being forced to pay, maybe you ought to tell your boss, set it up first. Make sure you can make yourself a batch of it first. You can show them how it works. And then you find, show them how much each individual bit cost. You might get something out of it. It might give you a bonus for saving them thousands of dollars. You might even be given a raise. Who knows? You might get nothing. But you'll be on the good side of your boss if you save them a bunch of money. If that's any real good thing. Who knows what your boss is like? I've had bosses where I didn't care to make them look good because they were mean. Anyways, so we're going to start making the batches, okay? And first what I'll do is I'll point out some of the stuff. Okay, I'll be right back. I'm going to start pulling this stuff in to the area where we can use it. Okay. Inside this is the silica powder. Let's see if I got aimed good enough to where you can see it. Probably not, so I better go down a little bit. Inside the yellow container is the silica powder. Inside these are dextrin. This is dextrin inside these, and these are this is kind of a good way of having it, because you're not going to want to have these all exposed to moisture in the air. You might, because this is something that bacteria might latch onto. You want to keep it out of the atmosphere so that you won't expose it to unsavory environments. Okay, so here's your dextrin, here's your silica powder, there's bentonite. Okay, now here's my mixer, and I bought this specifically for mixing stuff in the foundry. It's a very cheap mixer, and I'm going to use it to make the mold wash. Okay, so I'll get the extension cord hooked up. Don't think I have it long enough. So, yeah, I got it long enough. Keep it from being a trip hazard, I'll bring it down a little longer. Okay, here's the water I have. Here's a container to put the water in. Okay. Here's my spray gun. Now this is what's called a Sure Shot. Okay, you can put almost anything in here. For instance, A-Bomb 79, I've seen him use these a lot for spraying lubricants and preservatives on some of the metal he's working with. Okay, in this case, I'm going to once I make the mixture, the mold wash, I'm going to pour it into here, and we'll see how well this, I've never used this for spraying mold wash, but it's supposed to have a good fine spray once you adjust it correctly. Okay, here is my scales. I probably should buy another set of scales because I've used this enough to where it's not exactly good enough for food anymore. All right. Now, one of the best things about these scales is that you can set it up to measure. I should bring you closer and get you into the action a little bit here. So I'm going to move you over. There. That should be good enough. I can still get around. Okay. Now you have this on it where you can pour stuff in it, and but before you do that, you turn it on so that it measures this and then takes it out of the equation. Okay. So the same thing is going to be for this, right? Let's see. Let's get this opened up, because all I'm going to have for the dextrin is 2.4 ounces. Is that sealed up? I don't know. Yes, it is sealed up. And you might be able to see it's a kind of a light brown, kind of sweet smelling material. Okay. Yeah, now I got it on me. Alrighty. Let's turn it on. Okay. So now everything is zero, right? Even with this. So I need 2.4 ounces. Well, it doesn't give a 0.4 ounces. So we'll go with, well, it does give the pounds and ounces here. So dextrin 0.15 pounds. It still ain't going to give it. It isn't going to give it in a decimal. Well, I guess I'll have to give it a little bit of a, oh, you get back on there. It does give a fraction for your ounces, so I can work with that. One ounce. Two. 0.4 was the 2/10, no, 4/10, so it'd be 2/5, well, 2/10, 1/5. We'll see. 1/8, 1/4. That should be good enough. 4, 8, 12, that would be 3. Yeah, very close. All right, so that's the dextrin. All right, and I'll put this over here. Now, the next one is the bentonite. And that's right here. See if I can find something to scoop with it. Maybe this will work. Okay, well, doesn't have to be very much. Always store your stuff in the bags, because you don't want anything to absorb any water, especially here in Florida, for crying out loud. Florida has got so much humidity in the air that you got to be very careful about that. All right, so I got the bentonite and the dextrin. Now silica flour. Silica flour, I got to have 51.2 ounces. Well, this goes in pounds, so 3 pounds. Wonder if that'll be good enough. Anyway, let me get this out of the way. Don't trip over anything. Now I don't know how much silica flour weighs by a particular, whether it be a handful or what. So we'll have to check it out. Get ourselves a bit of it. Now, one thing about silica flour, don't inhale it. Okay? There's a disease called silicosis. You can get it from if you inhale even just regular silica sand, but this is a powder. This will go into your lungs even easier. So don't breathe it, okay? And if I was smart, I'll just put on my breathing protection. But where is it? Where did I put it? Okay. Well, I'll just have to be super careful. All right. I'll use this as a scoop. Doesn't feel very heavy, so it might. Let me see if my scoop in here will do better than that. It's not in there. Okay, so it must be in there where I can't get to it now because I got so much junk on it. But one thing I did learn is I gotta mold this stuff again. It's gotten very dry. We've got something we can use as a thing here. Thankfully, this stuff doesn't spread out in the air too much. Okay, that's got to be 3.2 pounds. And right now we got 2 pounds and some odd ounces. 2 pounds, 13 ounces. 3.2. Well, what do you know? Fell right in there. Cover this up so that nothing contaminates it. Now this container, I got it from McMaster-Carr also. All right, so that's the amount of silica powder I need to put in there. Okay, now water, I need 1.56 pounds of water. Okay. Boy, it sure don't seem like it's going to be a goodly amount. One and a half pounds, and this is almost 2 pounds. Well, it's 14 ounces, almost 15 ounces, so it's almost 2 pounds. Well, we'll test it out. We can always add more water if it doesn't turn out to be enough. Now, instead of me taking the all the dry stuff and mixing it as dry, you know, all the dry materials together, I'm going to put the stuff in the water that I know will dissolve and mix thoroughly. The first thing will be the dextrin, okay, and that's this. All right. Because we know that it is a plant-based sugar, and that mixes fairly decently. So I'll turn you over here a little better. Oh, I forgot to plug in my extension cord. Now she's plugged in. All right. Now we don't have to worry about frothing or anything like that. I think I'll move you over here. My back is blocking you. Now the goal is to get this mixed you know, thoroughly. So I'm not going to be in any big rush. I do want to do the best mixing job that we can. Okay, that looks like that is mixed. Yeah, I'm going to go get a spoon or you know, maybe even something to help me mix this. Some of it's getting pushed all the way on the side over here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the gremlins of video files finally got to me, finally attacked me. You see it all the time. People come on there and say, I lost files and have no idea what happened. Well, that happened to me. I had some, like, for this supposedly short video, I had something like 7 files. The last 3 files, which were supposed to be about 5 or 6 minutes long, turned out to be about 30 seconds long. Who knows why that happened? I have no idea. But luckily, the vast majority of the information I wanted to give you guys was done before those files messed up. Okay? Now, at the end of the good part of the whole thing, I was starting to mix all the ingredients together. That worked perfectly. There wasn't any problems with it. As a matter of fact, as I'll show you right here, here's the mold wash, and everything mixed good enough for this to be very much a liquid. Okay, so there was no mixing problems, nothing, you know, refused to mix with the rest of it. So the old formula worked great. Okay, and now for me to prove that it was working great, what I did is I got a paintbrush, dipped it in when it was still in the bowl. I dipped it in the wash and I painted part of this mold, okay, the ingot mold, and well, it absorbed kind of slowly in the, because that's cement, that's not regular molding sand, but it absorbed so slowly, and it made a nice, it's almost like a ceramic, a hard ceramic. I'll get you in here. See, this I showed you. I don't know if we caught it before the mess up or not, but I showed you inside here. This was all cracked up, messed up because of how old this was. And so I painted in here. I'll tell you, that stuff is like ceramic coating. This stuff's going to be good, because I am going to pour into this the remainder of my next mold, or rather next heat, and we'll see how this reacts. And it's only going to be aluminum, so it's not like I'm going to be pouring stainless steel or something like that into it. But what I did to show you how well it would work with a paintbrush is I just dipped it in there and painted in there and had this area in here, and then the rest of this was gray cement. And so then what I did is I got this, put a little bit of the mold wash inside it, assembled the gun, and pressurized it. That's how this particular spray gun works. Is that once you put it in, you screw it all together, and then you use this port right here to pressurize it with LP air, and then you've got this to spray it, right? Well, despite how well I screwed this down and raised it and bring it back and forth, apparently this spray gun wasn't the kind of spray gun that I needed to use to spray the mold wash, because it came out in streams, like 5 or 6 different streams, and that's not, you don't really want that to be spraying in your mold wash. You have 5 or 6 different streams. I wound up having pools in there, okay, which necessitated me to spread it all out, trying to make it as even as possible. But you look at this, yeah, it feels almost, what will you call that? Almost like the stuff you put in your walls to fill in holes. Anyway, I better put this on here before I lose it. That's supposed to save that from getting hurt. Anyway, all of those things was what was on the other files, okay? You didn't miss nothing. Just mixed the stuff, and then I just demonstrated how the stuff was used. And before this, this hadn't even dried. This here hadn't even dried, and I was done. And I went into the house with the GoPro, the Hero 4, which I have right here, and started working on editing everything. Well, I had everything being converted file-wise in the software when I had to leave and go to a volleyball game that my granddaughter was in. Okay, I don't know that that would ever had anything to do with the last 3 files being abruptly messed up, or what. Might have been, might not have been. I very much doubt that it would have had any change if I was there. Anyway, so this is basically going to be the last file, because there's nothing more that I could tell you that those last 3 files would have covered, other than just anecdotal information that I threw in there off the top of my head. But what I will do on this file, I will show you, or I will put in the picture-in-picture part of this video, the kind of spray can that we used in the Navy, and they still use out in the industry, in the outside, in the foundries, to spray mold wash on. Okay, this mold wash isn't, it's not like it's too thick. Okay, it's everything is all suspended in there still. It's not like all the heaviest materials have settled out in here, and that you have to mix it all over again. It's very good. I mean, it's an excellent mold wash, as you can see from that. But this just didn't handle the little tiny hole here, and the adjustment didn't handle that. So I would have to get something better, like maybe a paint sprayer instead of just a light lubricant sprayer. Maybe that'll be my next thing. I'll go ahead and buy a air operated or pneumatically operated paint sprayer that you would use to spray regular paint. Anyway, I'm sorry this couldn't have been as good as I wanted it to be. Everybody gets sidewhacked by the video gremlins ever so often. Now, this is my Hero 4, right? Tomorrow, I'm supposed to have the Hero 11 arrive. Don't know when, but my next project, when I ram up that garbage bag holder, I'll be using my Hero 11, and we'll see how easy or how not so easy that is. I've only had this Hero 4 for several years now, and it's worked great up to today. Okay, well, that's the end of that. Okay, so thanks for hanging through this video, and I'm sorry about the mess up, but everybody gets hit by this. So we'll see you the next time I have a video come on, and thank you very much, everyone, for subscribing. And if you've not subscribed, please do. I've still got stuff I can make, and that you might find interesting once I make it. All right, see you later, everybody, and have a good year. Bye-bye.